Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Journey Christian Church. I am Eric, and I'm a longtime volunteer here at Journey, where our mission is to invite and lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. And one way we serve out our mission is by serving our community. Each year, we partner with our local schools around our community to determine the needs of students for the upcoming school year. And this year is no different. We know now more than ever, there are so many students who are in need. And so we invite you all to participate in our annual Back to School supply drive that is going on now until August the 7th. So hopefully when you came in this morning, you received this school supply list. If not, we encourage you to grab one on your way out. If you're joining us online and you need to check out the school supply list, you can go to journeyrva.com. But really, we would love to bless the students in our community and equip them for this upcoming school year. So we encourage you to go out shopping. Over the next 2 Sundays, you can come and drop off your supplies at that yellow school bus that's in the lobby. Let's really help our community and prepare to equip these students for this new upcoming school year. Now we're gonna be together for 60 minutes today. We're gonna be hearing from our lead pastor, James Brummett. But before we get to that, stand up, say hello to a neighbor, and let's sing with Teresa and the rest of the band.
I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my tomb till I made. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my tomb till I met you. Come on. You called my name and I ran out of that grave. Out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave. Out of the darkness into your glorious day. See. How your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom is all that I know. The open road, Jesus, when I met you, you called my name and I ran out of that grave. Out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave. Out of the darkness into your glorious day. Rescue, my sin was heavy. The chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter. I was an orphan, but you called me citizen. When I was broken, you were my healer. Now your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future. My eyes are open. into your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, into your glorious day. We sing peace, peace, bring it all to peace. The storm surrounding me, let it break. At your name, still, call the sea to still, the rage in me to still, every wave. At your name, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Oh, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Sing, breathe, breathe. You call these bones to live, and you call these lungs to sing once again. I will praise Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. You silence fear. Oh, Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Come on. Oh, Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. You silence fear. Oh, Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive, forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Sing Jesus. Oh, Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. You silence fear. Oh, Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Oh, Jesus, Jesus. Oh, Jesus, Jesus. Your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive, forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Sing your name. Your name is alive, that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. mountains tremble, Jesus, Jesus. Yeah. Worthy of every song I could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, yeah. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe, we live for you. Oh, we live for you, yeah. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe, we live for you. Oh, we live for you. Sing holy. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart. Lead me in your love to those around me.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you, we live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you, yeah. And holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me.
Build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will sing. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Yeah. Lord, we thank you just for the ability to gather here, to hear your word, to hear what you have for us this morning. I pray that you soften our hearts. Just allow your word to make its way wherever it needs to in our hearts and our minds. We love you, we thank you, we praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, we can be seated here. Before we get to the message, I just wanted to stop for a second and just recognize that we at Journey understand that some of you all here in the auditorium today might be coming here with a lot of questions about faith, about God, about church. You might be new to church. You might be coming back to church after being away for many, many years. Or you might just have lingering questions that you've never been able to get answered because you never felt like there was a safe place where you could ask those questions without fear of judgment. If that's striking a chord with any of you all, we have an environment for you, and it's called Starting Point. And that Starting Point group, it's a 5-week conversational environment. It's a group that meets here Sunday mornings, and our next Starting Point group is starting up on August the 7th. We have leaders from Starting Point who are going to be available at the Starting Point banner in the back of the auditorium. If you're interested, and if this sounds like something you might be interested in, we invite you to stop by and learn a little bit more about this environment. Or if you feel like you're ready to take that next step, you can also register online at journeyrva.com under the events section. I also just want to thank you all for your generosity. It just would not be possible to allow us to pursue our mission to invite and lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus, to create these irresistible environments, to partner in our communities, to serve our students without your consistency, without your generosity in giving. So thank you so much for that as well. For those who give, we have 3 ways to give. You can text, you can give online, where most people do give online here at the church. Or if you brought your offering today, you can also drop that into the offering box located in the back of the auditorium on your way out. Now let's prepare our hearts and our minds for part 3 of the series with our senior pastor, James Brummett.
Well, have you ever had anything in life that has been kind of a curveball, something that you weren't expecting and that kind of turned everything upside down, something that you really didn't want to happen in your life, and now all of a sudden everything has changed? Well, that's what we've been talking about over the last several weeks, is about how to get through the things that we're going through. When life brings us a difficulty, when we are struggling, when we are in some kind of a pain or struggle, how do we get through what we're going through? And we've identified that there are a couple different stages of faith. The first is that of the confident faith. That's when we approach life as kind of fresh with our faith, where our prayers are working, seems like God is answering, God is blessing, and it's just a great season to be in. And some of you are in that season, and I'm glad that you're in that season. But then we've also discovered that there's another thing about the living faith. That's a faith that regardless of the circumstances around you, regardless of how good or bad or painful things are around you, there is a sense of peace that goes with you in life. And all of us want that. All of us want that. But to get to that kind of faith, to get to that point in life, we have to go through this thing called the challenge faith. That's when our prayers don't work as we want. That's when things are being turned upside down and we're not sure why. That's when doubts start to creep in. And so we've been talking about when we're in that kind of phase, how do we get through that? How can we navigate our way through some of the most painful and difficult seasons of life? And here's why all of this matters. Here's why what we're talking about really, really matters. It's because of this. Our response to this kind of season of challenge is crucial because it could determine whether or not we ever develop a living faith. You can't have a living faith unless you've been tried, unless you've been tested through the challenging faith. And so what we've been doing over the last couple of weeks is we've been looking at a story from the Old Testament, from when God delivered his people out of the slavery in the land of Egypt. And God called Moses to go back down in the land of Egypt and deliver his people from slavery because they'd been crying out for centuries. And so God says, I've heard my people, I've heard their cry, I've seen their suffering, and I am going to deliver them. And so he sends Moses down, he delivers them, but instead of taking them directly to the promised land, which is what he had promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he takes them southward into the desert. And from that point on, they have one challenge after another challenge after another challenge. And so we've been tracking along with this story. And have you ever read a book, a novel or something, and you're just curious as to how it all ends and you flip to the very end? You ever done that? Or maybe you're watching a movie that's really intense, maybe it's a little scary, and you just kind of press the mute button and you fast forward to see what happens. Don't tell anybody, but that's what I do with scary movies. Like sometimes it's like, I can't, and I don't do this, no, don't laugh, don't tell anybody. I don't do this with my family in the room because I don't want them to know, right? But if I'm watching a movie by myself and it's kind of a scary movie, that's what I do. So that's a secret, don't tell anybody, right? But I just want to know, what happens? Is this person going to survive? Is somebody going to jump out? What's going to happen at this juncture? And so that's what I want to do today. I want to flip to the very end of the story to find out what happens with this whole exodus out of Egypt and the journey into the promised land. And we come to the end of the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 34. This is kind of where it all ends. And it says this: Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which faces Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land, right? So he goes up to this mountain. He's going to look over all the promised land. Gilead as far as Dan, all of Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all of the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev, the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palms as far as Or. So he's seen the entire plain. And as you're looking, if you were Moses and you're saying, oh my goodness, this is the thing for centuries that God has promised. None of us have ever seen this. And now I get to gaze upon this whole deal, right? And so big moment for Moses. And then it says at the end, then the Lord said to him, verse 4, this is the land that I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to your descendants. What a moment. Moses realizes, wow, this is going to be ours. And then it says, and if you were reading ahead, this is what you would read next. And then God says, I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross into it. Whoa, wait a minute. God's going to take the people to the promised land, and Moses has been doing this whole thing, and all of a sudden you're saying, but you're not going to get to see it. You're going to see it with your eyes, but you're never going to experience it. That's right. And then in verse 5 it says this: So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab according to the Lord's word. And when you read that, if you were to fast forward the movie, if you go to the end of the novel, right, and you're to read that, you're like, no. The hero always walks off into the sunset. Like it's always a good thing. Everybody always wins, right? We don't like the ending for Moses' life. Like Moses was off, he was a shepherd and he was doing fine, but then God called him out, and so he went out and he said, all right, I'll go do this task. And then all of a sudden, and this is the way you treat him, God? What in the world are you doing? That's not the way the story is supposed to end. And you know what? We struggle with the story of Moses and how his life ended, because if we think about it for very long, it really causes us to ask some uncomfortable questions. It really causes us to face some potential realities. Like this. What in your life hasn't gone as you planned? Like, this is not how I wanted. This is not what I wanted, right? I have struggled and struggled and struggled, and the thing that I want is not happening. And when we go through a season like that, we struggle. And like Moses, we're like, no, wait a minute, God. I thought, like I was doing fine, but I thought that this was going to turn out a little bit different, right? Maybe you've gone through a divorce. Maybe you've gotten a diagnosis that's not a very good diagnosis. Maybe a child has completely rebelled, turned their back on the family. Maybe there's been a death in the family. What in your life doesn't seem right or fair right now? Because that's where Moses is. So we've gone to the end of the story. Let's go back 40 years earlier, because this is not the first time that the Israelites have been on the cusp of the promised land. The first time they came to the cusp of the promised land, God was saying, hey, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go in and take it. It is yours. They've gone through all of the struggle. They've gone through all of the pain and the coming out of Egypt. And now God was ready for his people to go into the land of Egypt. And right at that very moment, they blinked. They hesitated. They didn't do what God had commanded them to do. And this is what we read in Numbers chapter 13. It says in verse 1, then the Lord spoke to Moses, send men out to scout the land of Canaan I'm giving the Israelites. Send one man who is a leader among them from each of their ancestral tribes. And so it says down in verse 17, when Moses sent them to scout out the land of Canaan, he told them, see what the land is like, whether the people living there are strong or weak, few or many. Is the land they live in good or bad? Are the cities they live in encampments or fortifications? Is the land fertile or unproductive? Are there trees in it or not? Be courageous, bring back some of the fruit from the land. And so that was their instruction. Then it says down in verse 25, and at the end of 40 days, they return from scouting out the land. And so they go in for a month and a half, and they scout out the land. They scout out the entire land. They come back. In fact, they brought some fruit back with them. And it says they cut off a branch of one cluster of grapes that was so large, they put it on a pole, and 2 men had to carry that cluster of grapes, one cluster of grapes. It was everything that God had promised. And this is what happens in verse 27. So they come back. They reported to Moses, we went into the land where you sent us. Indeed, it is flowing with milk and honey, and here's some of its fruit. However, the people living in the land are strong, and the cities are large and fortified. It is not just like a couple of tents out there. I mean, this is a whole different deal. And then verse 29, the Amalekites are living in the land of the Negev. And you don't know anything about the Amalekites. I don't know anything about the Amalekites, but they knew something about the Amalekites. And if this were a movie, the soundtrack would change. Dum, ba-da-dum, dum, The Amalekites are there. Ooh, the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites live in the hill country. And the Canaanites live by the sea and along the Jordan. I mean, all of these things are happening. So everybody's like, oh no, this is terrible. This is not the report that we wanted. Verse 30, then Caleb quieted the people in the presence of Moses. So everybody's getting upset. There's murmuring going across the land. And Caleb says, well, hey, hold on everybody. Settle down. And he says this, let's go up now. Let's not delay. Let's go up now and take possession of the land because we can certainly conquer it. Hey, don't listen to this. We're fine. God has told us to go and we need to go. And so Caleb says, let's go. And then people are looking around and they're thinking, okay, well, maybe we should go. And then the larger of the group comes back, verse 31. But the men who'd gone up with him responded, we can't attack the people because they are stronger than we are. It's impossible. We can't do this. They're stronger. So they gave a negative report to the Israelites about the land they had scouted. And then it's all, negative nanny, right? They just pile on here. The land we passed through to explore is one that devours, its inhabitants, right? And all the people we saw that were men of great size, like they're huge. These people are huge. We even saw the Nephilim there, and that was a race of giant people. That's who they were. And to ourselves, we seemed like grasshoppers, and we must have seemed the same to them. There is no way. There are giants living in the land. They're powerful. The land itself devours people. We can't do it. We can't do it. They blinked. When have you been asked by God to do something and all of a sudden you blinked? You hesitated because of fear. That's what's happening here. They have been told by God, I'm taking you in. I've brought you out of the land of slavery. I'm going to give you this land. Now go take it. Nope, we can't do it. They forgot about God. When God calls you to do something, he will empower you to do it. Don't shrink back, don't blink. And so they blink. And then God says, okay, because you blink, I'm going to exercise judgment against the whole nation. So for the next 40 years, 1 year for every day that you scouted out the land, for the next 40 years, you will wander in the desert and you will die, everybody who's above 20 years of age. So that was the judgment that God gave to him. And then there were some of them that said, no, okay, we made a mistake. I think we can make it now. We can take it. And so they say, let's go take it. Let's do what God told us to do at the very beginning. And Moses says, don't do that, because if you go down there, you'll get killed. And they said, no, the Lord will be with us. And so they did. They gathered up a group of people. They went down, and exactly what Moses told them would happen happened. They all died. And so for the next 40 years, they wandered in the desert until that entire generation, 20 years and above, died in the desert. They were burying people all of the time. Now, after that experience, you would think that they had learned their lesson, wouldn't you? They've been grumbling, we've read and learned, they've been grumbling against Moses and Aaron from the very beginning, and then all of a sudden, they're right there on the precipice. God says go, they blink, they say no, and then a bunch of them die because and all of a sudden you would think, okay, now they're gonna follow God, not so fast. A couple chapters later in the book of Numbers, this is what we read, Numbers chapter 20. They come upon a moment, and it says this: the entire Israelite community entered the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and they settled in Kadesh. There was no water for the community, so they assembled against Moses and Aaron. All right, so we're out here in the middle of nowhere in the desert. There's no water, and it says in verse 3, the people quarreled with Moses and said, if only we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the Lord's assembly into the wilderness for us and our livestock to die here? It would have been better had we perished a long time ago. It would have been better had we died back in Egypt. Why in the world, Moses, did you lead us out here in the wilderness for everything that we have, all of our families, all of our livestock, to die in the middle of the desert? If you were Moses, how would you respond? If you were Moses, if you were Aaron, how would you respond? I mean, I can think of just a half a dozen things that I would say. Like, first of all, you guys were praying to God. I was out as a farmer, as a herdsman. I was doing fine. And no. You're crying out, save us, save us, save us from slavery. And so God does. He answers your prayer. He sends me to you. He delivers you from miracles, based on miracles, and you grumble all the way. He gives you up to the promised land, and all of a sudden you're like, no, we can't do it. What do you mean? I mean, I would go off. You would probably go off too, wouldn't you? They had not learned their lesson. I'd have given them peace of my mind. What does Moses and Aaron do? Verse 6. Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the doorway of the tent of meeting. They fell face down, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, verse 7. Take the staff and assemble the community. You and your brother Aaron are to speak to the rock. So there was a big rock. You're to speak to the rock while they watch, and it will yield its water. Okay, Moses, here we are again. One miracle after another. I've delivered them. I've answered their prayer. I've provided manna for them. I've provided all kinds of things. And here we are again. So this time, this is what I want you to do. Because prior to this, there was another such example where God told Moses, take your staff and tap the rock and water will come out. This time he says, no, I want you to go and I want you to stand in front of this rock, a different place, and I want you to speak to the rock. And when you speak to the rock, water will come out, and it's a miracle. It's a miracle. This is what I'm going to do. Yet again, isn't God patient? Isn't God good? We grumble and complain, and still God is faithful. Still God is good. And so it says in the next verse, So Moses took the staff of the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. And Moses, verse 10, and Moses and Aaron summoned the assembly in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, now this is one of my favorite verses in all the Bible, right here. Then Moses said to them, listen, you rebels. Oh, you didn't like it as much as I do, but I love that. There's never been a pastor who's wanted to say this to his congregation, I promise you. But Moses did. Listen, you rebels, you hardheads. I mean, all kinds of names come to mind. Must we bring water out of this rock for you? Here we are again. You're grumbling. Must we do this again? Then Moses, verse 11, raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his staff, so that abundant water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. So here we are again. God provides for his people. Moses and Aaron are at the very front of it. Moses comes and he strikes the rock twice. Day is saved. Day is saved. How good is God? And then you read the next verse. Verse 12, but the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me to demonstrate my holiness in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this assembly into the land that I've given you. I mean, I know it's been hard, but because you did not trust me, because you decided to do things your own way on this circumstance, because of that, you will not go into the promised land. And you say, and I say, and I get it. You're like, whoa, that's not fair. I mean, these people are a real pain in the neck. They grumble all the time. They don't obey. They've been against Moses and Aaron from the very beginning. Of course Moses was frustrated. Of course Moses kind of lost his mind in that moment. And yet God says, because you did not obey me, because you did not honor me, you personally will not see and enter into the promised land. Now we fast forward back to Deuteronomy chapter 34. Because it seems kind of unfair, right? It seems unfair. Moses has been enduring all of this, and you think, God, can you just throw him a little bone here, right? It's not that big of a deal. Instead of speaking to the rock, he struck the rock twice with his staff. I mean, he struck it once before and it worked. Why? I mean, not that big of a deal. And we don't like to think about this question because it makes us uncomfortable. It really makes us uncomfortable. And this is what we come to face with, these kinds of questions, all right? What if I'm never delivered from whatever it is that I'm going through? Like Moses had in his mind, hey, I'm going to go down into Egypt. I'm going to do the thing that God is asking me to do, which, I was perfectly fine. I didn't want to go. I tried to argue with God and say, no, pick somebody else. He said, no, you're the guy. And so I go down there, and the promise is we're going to get out of the land of Egypt. We're going to get out of the mess that we're in, and we'll finally get to the land that is flowing with milk and honey. We're going to have our own space. It's all going to be great. How many of you would make that deal? You say, okay, all right, land of flowing with milk and honey, you mean I don't have to, be a farmer anymore? I don't have to be a herdsman anymore? Okay, I'll do that. It may be difficult, but God's with me. I'm going to do that. And yet, along the way, you never get the thing that you were hoping for, that you were dreaming of, that you were praying for. Moses never got to enter into the promised land. He never got to experience the promised land. And maybe you've been in a season of life, maybe you're in a season of life right now thinking, what if things don't change? What if this season just keeps going on and on? What if I never receive that for which I long for and what I've been praying for? What if that happens? What if my suffering doesn't end? And there is no happy ending. What then, James? What then? Some of you are afraid of that question, aren't you? Because you've been in it for a long time. And one thing after another thing keeps happening, and you're like, when am I ever going to catch a break? Why do these things keep on piling up and piling up and piling up? And maybe you're thinking to yourself, maybe there isn't an end to my suffering. Then what? Speaking of suffering, why do we suffer? Why do we suffer? None of us want to suffer. And we really don't want to ponder this question too much because we feel like if I don't get an answer, like, why am I going through what I'm going through? God, why am I in this position? Why did that have to happen? Why did that person have to die? Why? And I think if we're to be honest, all of us have asked that question at some point or another in our life. God, why did this happen? I was doing everything right. I was following you. I was trying to do my best. Why in the world did that have to happen? Why am I experiencing that right now? Well, there are a couple of reasons. Sometimes things happen and we suffer because of our own decisions. We're just stupid sometimes. Anybody ever been stupid? Yep. We all have been. And we bring it on ourselves, right? We make decisions that put us into a season of suffering, and there are consequences, and sometimes we bring it on ourselves. Sometimes we suffer because of somebody else's decisions. Like we were going along just fine, and that numbskull, he did the thing, and all of a sudden it bumped, because his life blew up, all of a sudden it blew my life up too. Like, I was ethical in my job, and then all of a sudden, my boss's boss had to blow up the whole thing, and the whole company imploded. It wasn't my fault. I was doing my job. I was doing everything right. I just caught the shrapnel of some other foolish person. Sometimes it's just because we live in a broken world. A natural disaster happens. or car accident happens. And really, it's kind of like all of the above, right? That's why we suffer, all of the above. That's the why. But there's a more important question, and it's one that we don't ask ourselves very often. There's a more important question than why do we suffer, and that is, how will we respond to suffering? There are a million reasons for why. Everyone suffers in life at some point. Everyone does. So the why is not that important. The how we respond to suffering is way more important of a question. Earlier this year, I finished a biography on the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a pastor in Germany during the World War II era. It's called Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Prophet, Spy. And it was an amazing novel, or biography, not a novel. But I learned a lot. I didn't know there was a lot of history that was in the novel. But I learned a lot about what was happening in Germany at the time. It was a fascinating read. And eventually, Bonhoeffer was arrested and he was put into a prison camp. And you've probably heard about the prison camps and the gas chambers. There was another man by the name of Viktor Frankl. He was a psychiatrist, and he was a part of these prison camps, and he wrote a book. He survived all of it. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. Like when you go through that kind of suffering, when you go through that kind of torment, that kind of hard labor, that kind of torture, where every day you're fearing the gas chambers, it's just trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma. It really gets you to thinking. And what he saw was, as people were experiencing that common experience in the prison camps with the torture and the murder and it was just unbelievable. He would see the different prisoners go through the different barracks and they would give out their last piece of bread to somebody else who didn't have any food. And they started helping one another. And Frankl realized that there was something that the Nazis could never take away, that no man could take away from anyone. And it's the decision of how I respond to my circumstances. And this is what he would write in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He would say this: forces beyond your control can take away everything you possess except for one thing: your freedom to choose how you will respond to the situation. You get that choice. It's my choice. No one can take that choice away from us. And I promise you that none of us have experienced what he had to experience in these Nazi camps. And then he says this: suffering in and of itself is meaningless. It's meaningless. If we just suffer and that's it, it's just meaningless. We give our suffering meaning, he says, by the way in which we respond to it. So what is your circumstance? What are you going through right now? What is your suffering? Because you may not have any control over your circumstances, but what you do have control over, what you do have freedom of choice, is how you respond in those moments. That's your choice. And how you do that makes all the difference. And here's the bottom line for today. How we respond to suffering is more important than why we are suffering. And we ask the why question all of the time. Why, Lord, did you let this happen? Why did that? We ask it a million times. And really, honestly, we need to stop asking this why question, because we may never really know the real answer. The most important question is, how are we going to respond? So you're in the middle of it. You're in the middle of a season, and one thing after another thing after another thing after another thing keeps piling on. The question is, how do you respond to it? And I'm going to suggest two ways in which you can respond to that kind of situation, to those kinds of things in life. The first is this: you need to choose to let suffering transform you. You need to choose to let suffering transform you. You do know that suffering transforms you, don't you? Any runners in the room? Anybody run? That's like a thing for you? No? You're smart. My wife sometimes is a runner. She's trained for a half marathon, and it's grueling. For anybody who's trained for a marathon, you just know, you know what? This is going to hurt, and this is going to cause a lot of suffering. And everyone around me is going to say, why in the world are you doing this to yourself? But we know that when we train for it, it transforms us. That pain and that suffering transforms us. Some people go without eating for an entire meal or a day or a few days or a week. It's called fasting. Why in the world would anybody go without food? It's because they want to achieve a higher spiritual purpose, and so they fast. We've talked about that before. Sometimes people do things like they see somebody else in need and they say, you know what? They're in kidney failure. I'm going to give them one of my kidneys. That's not easy. Like, you're totally committed at that point. Why would you do that? Because of the transformation that happens. We all experience suffering. Now, here's the thing. When we're okay with suffering when we choose it for ourselves because we value the transformation. No, this is my choice. I know I'm crazy for wanting to do the marathon or the Ironman or whatever it is. I'm crazy for wanting to do that, but it's my choice. I'm willing to pay the price. I'm willing to go through the suffering because of what it's going to accomplish. But the point is, we need to value the transformation that comes from unwanted suffering. Sometimes we enter into suffering willingly because we know it's going to produce something that we desire. But there are other times in life when we're going through a difficulty, and instead of fighting against that, we need to submit to it, we need to yield to it, and we need to value the transformation that comes from this unwanted suffering that God allows into our lives. So are you fighting? Are you fighting against it, trying to say, how can I? Or are you saying, you know what, God, this is not what I would have chosen. This is not the path that I want to be on. But I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you. So you need to choose to let suffering transform you. The second thing that I want to encourage you to do is to let suffering remind you of the bigger story. Let suffering remind you of the bigger story. What do I mean by that? Well, when we are in the midst of suffering, when we're going through a difficult time, when we're going through a challenging season, generally our thoughts are about what? Us. How can I get out of this? How can I get through this? It's all about us. It's all about escaping that from which we are experiencing. And we miss the whole idea that maybe God's allowing this for a bigger purpose than just what we're experiencing. Maybe it's not even about the character transformation that comes through our suffering or our pain or our deal. Maybe there's even a bigger picture here. And sometimes we miss that. I can think of some of you that I have talked with, and you know who you are. And you're in the middle of it. It's just like for year after year after year, you just seem like you've been pounded and pounded and pounded and pounded and pounded and pounded. And I marvel at how you remain faithful to God and how your attitude and your spirit just keep on going. Now, maybe you don't think it's that big of a deal. Maybe you're just like, well, James, I'm glad that inspires you. but I'd rather be out of it. But you don't understand. The people around you, you're setting an example to them of what it looks like. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than just your experience. And I don't know why God allows certain people to experience certain things. And if we had our way, we'd hit the eject button and be done with it, right? But until that moment comes, we remain faithful to God because there's a bigger story at play here. And when you come to the end of the book of Deuteronomy and you see that God says, you know what, Moses, like I said to you a while back, you're not going to enter because you didn't speak to the rock like I commanded you. You struck the rock. You dishonored me. And therefore, you're not going to experience the promised land. You say, well, that's kind of a down note to end a person's life on. So here we are. Moses is on this mountain. He's an elderly man. He has been faithful to God. He's made his mistakes along the way, but he's been there for the last 40 years doing what God had asked him to do, and still God said no. And you look at that and say, well, Moses' life was kind of a failure. He kind of flamed out at the end. There wasn't this big homecoming celebration for Moses. He didn't get to celebrate with the rest of the team. He got left behind. And if that's the way you look at this story, you'd be wrong. Because after Moses goes back up on the mountain and he dies, Joshua is given over as the leader of the nation, but this is how the book of Deuteronomy closes. This is the closing chapter, the closing epitaph on Moses' life. Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 10. This is how Moses is described by someone else after he's dead. No prophet has arisen again in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. There's no one who's spoken face to face with the Lord like Moses has spoken. Verse 11, he was unparalleled for all the signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do against the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and all of his officials and to all of his land. Verse 12, and for all of the mighty acts of power and terrifying deeds that Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. He didn't get to go into the promised land, but everyone gave him his due. There was no one else like Moses. Moses is at the top of the pile in his life. Not because he was perfect, not because he got the thing that he hoped for, but because he was faithful to God in all of those things. The reality is Moses is remembered as one of the greatest men in the Bible. He was not a failure, and his sufferings were not in vain. And just because you don't get it to the promised land doesn't mean that you're a failure, and does not mean that your sufferings are in vain. Bigger story. It's not just about you. See, Moses played a huge part in the bigger story of God's plan to help people find their way back to him. He was faithful in his season. He did what God asked him to do. It was not always terrible. It was not always great, but Moses was faithful. How about you? How about you? You've got two choices. In your suffering, in your trial, in your disappointments, you can choose to let suffering transform you, and you can let suffering remind you of the bigger story, and that's what I would encourage you to do. Don't fight against it. Submit to God in this process. Because, again, bottom line, how we respond to suffering is more important than the why we are suffering. Let's pray. Father, I know that there are a lot of broken hearts in this room right now listening to this message. And Father, sometimes we don't always get the answer from you that we seek. We don't always get the relief that we want or get the relief that we want when we want it. But in the midst of that, Lord, would you help us to allow that challenge, that season, that disappointment, that heartache, that suffering to transform us into the kind of men and women and young people that you desire that we be? Would you help us submit to that process and trust you? And Father, would you help us to remember that it's not just about us. It's not just about our life. It's not just about our family. There's a bigger storyline happening, and we're a part of it. God, help us to understand that even though we go through difficulties, that our suffering, like Moses's, is never in vain. That you're bringing something good out of the midst of the ashes. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, I'm glad that you're here for today. I hope this was encouraging to you. Maybe somebody else that you know would benefit from this message. And if so, you can go on our website or on our YouTube channel and forward this message, encourage someone else to watch it, even on social media. So we're glad that you're here. If you are new to Journey, we're so glad that you have chosen to be with us today. We've got an environment just for you. It's called Connections. It's on your left as you exit the building. We've got a free gift for you if you've never stopped by, or if you've been here for a while, Journey is your church home, and you are not yet connected through serving. I want to encourage you to go to Connections and ask about how you can get connected to serving. This is really important. Do you realize that in 4 weeks, all the kids are going back to school? Oh yeah, okay. All the parents are like, yeah, we know, baby. All right, we're ready for it. Well, last Sunday was the third highest attendance we've had all year. All right, we're in the middle of the summer, and we could use some more volunteers to help us as we prepare for the fall. And so if you're not connected, if Journey's your home church and you're not connected through serving, this is your time. So go by Connections today, ask, how can I get connected in serving? And I'll just tell you right now, the biggest area of need is our children's areas. All right, so yeah, let's hear that for the children's area volunteers. All right. Hey, next week we start a brand new message of series called Counterfeit. It is a Journey series. I can't wait to see you again next week. Have a great week, everybody.